Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am here today in a bit of a more informal way with Tuna to talk about the DBT course that I'm currently taking. So I did mention in one of the videos on DBT that I would be providing an update after the completion of each module. And last Thursday I did complete the interpersonal effectiveness skills, so I wanted to come on here and talk about what it looked like, what my experience was, and where my head is at after having been in this program for 7 weeks now. The interpersonal effectiveness skill module, as I had just mentioned, was 7 weeks long. So during this time, there is a focus on mindfulness, and I also learned how to deal with relationships and how to become more assertive. Before I dive into what my actual experience with the first module was, I want to quickly give everyone an overview of what the structure looked like. So as I had mentioned, these are weekly group sessions that last 2 hours. And essentially the first hour of the program is we always began with a brief mindfulness session or activity that lasted maybe 5 minutes or so. And then we would spend the next 45 to 50 minutes individually talking about how our week went, how was the homework, if we ran into any issues over the week that we needed to troubleshoot, and have the therapist help us in role playing and having input from different people in the group as to maybe what would have been better alternatives to meet the goals that we had in mind for these scenarios that played out throughout our weeks. After a short break, we would then come back, and it was during really the second hour of that group session that the skills would be taught. So the first half is really homework review, and the second half is we would have one of the therapists teach us either a mindfulness skill or a interpersonal effectiveness skill. And then we would always end the sessions with doing a round table of everyone had to give one word that summarized their experience of the group. So whether you want to say you feel overwhelmed or grateful or anxious or optimistic, whatever it was, you had to give one word of how you were feeling about the session that you had just completed. Okay, so now to talk about my actual experience with the course. As I had mentioned, this was 7 weeks long, and the first 3 sessions were focused on mindfulness. So the very first session, I was obviously very nervous, very stressed. I went into it though with an open mind, and to my surprise, I found a great sense of relief and community within just the very first session, having other people who seemed to finally understand how I was feeling and also be going through the same things as me. It was very validating, very motivating, encouraging. And I left that very first session feeling optimistic and happy that I have found people who were like me. But at the same time, because the first session is a lot of going over consent, getting to know everyone, talking about what the program is, and then I felt like at the very last minute, they kind of threw on mindfulness skills that we were supposed to learn, and it was done very quickly and kind of abruptly. So we left the first session having all this homework to do, so all these different mindfulness skills to practice throughout the week. And I know that mindfulness can, like, if you've never practiced it, it can seem easy because it's take a few minutes out of your day, which honestly anyone can take a few minutes out of their day to do anything. But if you've ever tried to meditate or practice mindfulness, you will know how difficult it actually is. So as someone who had been meditating and doing mindfulness for a few years now, and it's not anything new, but it's still the fact of whenever you learn a new skill, it takes a while to adapt to it and to find ways to fit it into your schedule so that it doesn't feel as much as a chore. And being that I'm also completing my master's, I began this module during a period in the semester where it was crazy busy. My partner also had just broken his arm, so I was doing things at home more than usual because he couldn't do dishes or things like that. And then on top of that, my partner and I and some of our friends have a kind of like motivation group where if we give ourselves a challenge that we want to do, and if we don't complete it, we have to pay $1 to everyone in the group. So my daily challenge, I think for March, was to be meditating half an hour every day. And then on top of that, now I had all this new homework from my group of all this different mindfulness stuff. So I did not want to do it. And there was a lot of resistance for me at the beginning of the course. And honestly, that probably took 3 weeks for me to finally get over that resistance and anxiety and feelings of really not wanting to do anything during this course. So it was kind of a rocky start in the sense that I felt completely overwhelmed, and I think that a lot of people also in my course felt this feeling of initial angst and having too many things to learn at once. And I think that that's normal. So for anyone who's curious or who is maybe on the wait list or currently taking the course, just know that it's normal that when you start something, you're going to feel overwhelmed. It's going to feel like a lot. You're going to feel a lot of internal resistance and urges to not do those things. If you can just find ways to maybe give yourself smaller goals. So don't say, I'm going to practice the 5 skills every single day. You're probably not going to end up doing any of them. So just setting smaller goals throughout your days and spreading them out a bit more. It's better just to do 1 minute of one thing a day than nothing at all. Once we completed the 3 first sessions, so the mindfulness ones, I felt a great sense of relief, and I was feeling a lot more confident and optimistic about my journey within this DBT program. The good thing about these mindfulness skills is that, yes, in the very first module, they seem completely overwhelming, but in the 2 other modules, we will spend the first, I'm assuming, 3 sessions again, relearning the exact same things that we already did. So to reinforce those skills and so to not forget them. And I think that the second time around and the third time around, when I relearn these things, I won't be as overwhelmed because I already know what they are. I've practiced them and I know ways how to integrate them into my daily life so that they're not as tedious and painful to do. Although the mindfulness skills were overwhelming to learn, just because they were so many, it's not that they're necessarily difficult to do. Yes, mindfulness is difficult to do, but like I had mentioned, because I am someone who has been practicing mindfulness for a few years now, it wasn't extremely foreign to me, and I knew kind of what to expect with those things. But once we got into the interpersonal effectiveness skills, I found that it was at this point that I experienced a lot of bumps along the way, good ones and a lot of bad ones too. For the interpersonal effectiveness skills, there's essentially 3 different categories of skills that we learned. So the first one was objectives effectiveness, the second one is relationship effectiveness, and the third one is self-respect effectiveness. So the first 3 sessions were mindfulness, and then the next 3 sessions we dedicated one to each one of these categories. And the last session of the module was doing a wrap up, and we also learn how to know what intensity to use when we're making a request or saying no to something. But it was really during the last 4 sessions of the modules that I experienced the most bumps along the way, because we were learning skills that go against everything that I know as a person. So for me, it's very unnatural to ask for something. It's very unnatural to say no to something. And this whole module is about identifying what we want and need and then asking for it or saying no. So obviously it was very challenging to incorporate those skills into my daily life and even accept that, okay, this is a problem and this is also something that I need to change now, which is super difficult. The one thing that I did notice is that the skills that we were learning, so for example, the Dear Man, as I had mentioned in my DBT video, and if you haven't watched that, I'll just link it above here so you can go check that out. But the Dear Man essentially is a structure to follow when you are asking for something or expressing yourself. And because this is new to me, I found that I was following the structure to a T like a robot. So I would be saying things like, I don't know, I'm just going to make something up, but when you didn't take out the trash, the story I'm telling myself is that you don't care about me. Can I please ask that next time that I ask you to take out the trash, that you take it out, so that way I won't be mad and you won't get annoyed. And it's very robotic. And maybe this didn't sound as robotic, but when a conflict is happening and I'm like actively thinking about the steps, I will say it like one sentence at a time. And obviously during the course, I'm talking to my partner every week about what we're learning, so he's aware of all the skills that I'm learning, so that when I was making a request or asserting myself, he could literally follow along in his head at which letter I was in this acronym, which can be frustrating for the people around you because you went from being very expressive and emotional and kind of all over the place to now like a structured robot who is super just not fluid, and it's not very natural. The one thing that they kept reinforcing and that my individual therapist told me too is that the more you practice, the more natural these skills will become, and the less you'll have to follow it, the structure per se. Like, this is not a firm structure that I need to use in every single scenario. It's just something that's very structured. So at the beginning, when we're learning it, we have something to follow, but that later on you can adapt it to your personal style of speaking, because it's not everyone who speaks like a therapist or like a robot. The other thing that I learned during this module, and that was very difficult other than sounding like a robot when I was speaking, is that the skills do not always work. Because here we're dealing with interpersonal relationships, we're dealing with communicating to other people. And as much as you can follow the structures and the skills that they give you perfectly, we can't control what other people do or how they will react to what we're saying. And so I found that sometimes when I was practicing my skills, they did not go over well with the people that I was trying them out with. And because also I find that this is new to me, I was very rigid with how I was expressing myself, and I was following the thing to a T, so there was not much room for flexibility outside of those borders, and that makes it difficult to communicate for other people with me. And so there was a lot of times where I tried the skill, and in my mind I thought about it, I had it all planned out. Sometimes I even wrote in my journal before having the actual conversation, and then I had the conversation and it went like complete garbage, complete shit, and that's okay. And then it's okay now, it's funny now, but in the moment when it does happen, it can be very devastating, very frustrating, and it does set you back. There was a lot of times where I found myself in the valley of despair, and the valley of despair essentially is like at the bottom of the canyon where you just think that you're never gonna get out, nothing's ever gonna change, nothing's gonna get better. There was definitely a lot of those moments throughout the past 7 weeks. And it can be discouraging at time, obviously. However, looking back, and there was a lot of moments, like there's a lot of big moments of feeling despair and hopelessness, and like I was never going to change and nothing was going to get better. I think that's okay, and that's also kind of part of having BPD. It's those feelings of hopelessness. But I would also get a lot of random moments of, wow, something is different here. I'm doing something different. Things don't feel the same like they did before when I have conversations with people. And I would catch myself realizing that I had changed and that I was making progress. It's just that the progress is so small, and you catch very minute, tiny glimpses of it in random times during the days, during the weeks. But it's when you catch yourself during those moments that you realize how how things are changing. It's just that this is a very slow process. With DBT, it's 6 months, so I'm not expecting to see miracles after 3 weeks, 2 months, or even 4 months. For DBT, often people repeat the program twice, so they end up doing it for a year straight. And it's because with personality disorders, they're so ingrained in ways of thinking and behaviors that it's very hard to change. And that's why typically people do end up doing the full 2 rounds, so for the 1 year program. So that's why in my head, after doing the first module, I do notice a lot of changes in myself, but I'm also realistic in the fact that these are skills that I'm learning. It takes practice, it takes time, and I'm not going to be perfect right away. I am much more confident in myself now that I am capable of changing, and I have seen a lot of progress with myself just over the past 2 months. And it's different ways that I'm thinking and behaving as well. So I'm much more aware of my own needs inside, and I can actually communicate those to people more effectively. So for example, if I'm tired and someone will ask me to do something for them, usually I would just say yes, and then I end up doing that thing, but I end up doing it half-assed, or I'm not present, or I'm grumpy and moody with the other person, and it ends up being a bad experience for everyone. So now I'm more able to recognize within myself when I'm feeling kind of off, and actually communicate it to the other person and say, hey, I'm feeling kind of irritated right now. Can you give me 5 minutes so that I can go shower or go do something to take care of myself, so that I can come back and be there for you and be present and take care of you. So that has been a big shift that I've noticed within myself, and it is very motivating and exciting to see that, because before, even if I knew that I was irritated or whatever, I wouldn't listen to myself, and I would put myself in situations where, like I said, I would just end up being grumpy, and that's not fun for anyone. The journey is definitely daunting, but I do feel as though I'm on the right track. My individual therapist gave me the analogy of walking to BC. So I am currently in Ottawa, and British Columbia is a province in Canada. So my therapist told me, if you were from Ottawa to walk 5,000 miles, would you be able to see BC? To which I answered yes. So then she asked me, if you walked 100 miles, would you be able to see BC? The answer is no. But she then said that if you walked 100 miles, you're not going to be able to see it, but you're on the way there. And in therapy, you learn different skills, so different mindfulness skills and interpersonal effectiveness skills, so that maybe one day when you're walking along to BC, these mindfulness skills will then act as a bus. So then you see a bus and you get on the bus, and the bus takes you to a train, and the train takes you to an airport, and then you end up flying, and you end up getting there much quicker than you thought you would. So these different skills are vehicles to get you to this end goal that you have, which is finding this life worth living, and finding a state of balance with your symptoms and your feelings and your thoughts, so that you can live more in line with not only who you are as a person, but also just having a more balanced perspective between your emotional and your rational side, so that you can function better in society. Overall, I found this first module extremely helpful, and honestly, even if it was just once a week meeting with other people who had BPD, that alone would be worth it. I think the community aspect and getting to talk to others who are experiencing the same symptoms as me and are also going through the same program together, whether you like it or not, you feel bonded to those people. It's like a sense of family. And we created a WhatsApp group. We Zoom sometimes to just talk about life and our feelings whenever we're not in the course. So I mean, it has been nice in that sense too. And with COVID especially, just to have friends, different friends, and friends especially who understand what you're going through was very important to me in helping me progress along this first module. I think the biggest takeaway from this first module here is that change takes a long time, and the process of it is very difficult, but ultimately extremely worthwhile. I'll be starting the next module on emotional regulation next week, and once I do complete it, I will be releasing another video similar to this one to talk about my experience and the key takeaways from it. So make sure to subscribe to my channel to make sure that you don't miss it. And the best way to support my channel is to like my videos, share them, and of course subscribe, as I had mentioned. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week for another episode of On the Line.